You're watching News in Depth on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Well, another week, another back and forth over Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy now saying the Ukrainian people will decide on any concessions of land as he reveals Washington is pushing him to retreat from the Donbas. At the same time, European leaders again insisting that Kyiv's fate is that of the entire continent. Here to break it all down is TVP World's News Director Adam Jasser. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Can I start with this clip from Finnish President Alexander Stubb before we go anywhere?
The reality is that peace can be good, bad, or some kind of compromise. The reality is also that we Finns must prepare for the moment when peace comes, and that all the conditions for a just peace we've talked so much about over the past 4 years are unlikely to be fulfilled.
Is that what we're seeing play out in real time? President Zelenskyy hinting at a referendum on giving up Ukrainian land, or at least retreating in the Donbas, kind of contemplating what were previously constitutional red lines.
Americans want a deal. It seems finally Putin may want a deal as well. And that creates a lot of pressure on Zelenskyy to accept it.
Well, I guess the question is, can Ukraine also simply not win this war of attrition anymore? It's staring down a long, cold winter. President Zelenskyy is facing a corruption scandal at home. Is Ukraine also thinking, well, it might be time just to end this no matter what?
It certainly seems that the pressure on Ukraine is coming from all sides. It's coming from the American administration, which, as we know, stopped supplying Ukraine with weapons unless Europeans buy it first. So there's no more money from America. Trump is eager to get this done. The Europeans, they're still prepared to pay, but they're also painfully aware that without America's commitment to, for example, intelligence sharing, coordination of aid and political support from Washington, they may not be able to meet Ukraine's expectations. So in a sense, the Americans and President Trump personally is gradually imposing his will on everybody.
And is that at the same time coming as Ukraine and President Zelenskyy appear more willing to make a compromise?
I think a lot depends on whether Putin is prepared to abandon parts of his maximalist agenda. And we know that the original 28-point plan that Americans presented to the Ukrainians, and which was partly written in the Kremlin, now got reduced to 19, 20 points, and that obviously Putin must have accepted some movement on his part. The only explanation, a lot of people are skeptical. A lot of people are saying Putin will never agree to give up on his maximalist agenda. But if you watch the dynamic between the US and Russian leaders and people who are involved in this on both sides, they're business people. And it seems that people around Putin particularly are saying, look, we want to go back to business as usual with America and possibly with Europe. It's been 4 years now, and if it doesn't end, our economy may collapse completely. So maybe it's time to settle this. And if we get most of what we wanted, then maybe we can concede. That's how I read the situation at the moment.
Well, and they know Donald Trump is a guy that for years has heralded his business deal-making skills.
Look, I don't want to comment on his
But he likes
business.
to make deals. He likes to make business deals, doesn't he?
He looks at international politics and international relations through the prism of deals and business deals. And he's using his political power to get these deals. If you look at the, people don't very often focus on this, but if you look how much money, government contracts, decisions on mergers in the United States are treated as sort of political decisions rather than just market decisions. He's moving the same method to Asia, to Europe, and to Russia. So business.
How practical is this demilitarized zone? I mean, is it some kind of a good middle ground, or is it a buckling for Kyiv?
that's one of the issues that is still undecided as far as we can see. And I think President Zelenskyy said something that, okay, if there is a demilitarized zone from which we are supposed to withdraw our troops and Moscow is not supposed to move their troops in, then who's responsible for managing this piece of land? And says the Americans have not explained that yet. So I think that's an open question, but that certainly is a vulnerability for Ukraine, because we know the track record of Putin of sticking to his word.
Well, a case of trust in this instance.
So there will be some excuse for moving the troops in.
We're hearing those reports tonight that Ukraine could join the EU in January 2027 as part of the latest negotiations. Is that a nod to the backing Kyiv will need after a ceasefire, or is it throwing out this fundamental merits-based accession process?
I don't think that merit-based process can be so easily thrown into the bin, because there are national parliaments in every member country that will have to approve whatever membership accession negotiations produce. So I don't think there is a shortcut there. I think that it may be a way to help Ukraine explain, and Zelensky to explain, that there is a trade-off that is favorable to Ukraine. So it's a political declaration to me, rather than saying, you know, we're going to throw the rule book out. Particularly that, you know, we also see that the Americans are, we've seen from the national strategy, they're not particularly keen on the EU as a concept. So I think it's the European leaders dangling this EU membership, this fast track to EU membership, as a sweetener for Zelensky and for the Ukrainian people to accept what President Stubb referred to as not necessarily just peace.
Can it be a point in a document that is meant to be legally binding, a kind of political declaration?
Well, it depends which part you're talking about, because legally binding in Moscow's terms doesn't exist. So at the end of the day, it is going to be mostly a political deal. It can then later be codified into specific agreements on specific issues, but we're not there yet. So if there is ceasefire somewhere there, and then the other things like a peace deal follow, then we may see some specific agreements. And the issue of what to do with Ukraine's EU membership will have to be decided, but then by Europe, not by Russia, not by Donald Trump. It's not their business.
I've somehow managed to avoid asking you directly about Donald Trump so far, somehow. But the US president says he's sick of meetings over Ukraine. That was his quote today. That's in the same week, of course, that he called European leaders weak. He says the continent we're living on is decaying. Is this the last chance for Ukraine to have a peace deal brokered by Washington?
Trump is heavily invested, and he, you know, sometimes he contradicts himself. But the other day he was asked directly by a reporter, is there a risk of you walking away from this? And said, no. He promised peace in Ukraine, and that's why he's twisting Zelensky's arm at the moment to get it done. And he's also pushing Europeans to accept whatever comes. Still, the biggest question is, has he managed to convince Vladimir Putin? And this is still a question mark, because people around Putin obviously are ready for a deal. They want to return to business with America, because only America can help them get out of their economic predicament at the moment. But the question of whether the strongman in the Kremlin thinks along the same lines, he may just back out of it at the last moment and say, no, I still want everything.
So when it comes to these negotiations, which have been back and forth, I can still remember when we talked about officials meeting in Turkey or in the Middle East, is the ball now in Vladimir Putin's court?
I think the ball is in different courts. It's moving between courts.
Okay.
It's in Ukraine's court. That's why Zelensky is talking about a referendum, because he needs to sell whatever deal he manages to get to the Ukrainian people. And we know that many in Ukraine believe they should not concede land at all. And these soldiers on the front line, and there are hundreds of thousands of them, they want to keep on fighting. Then there is the ball in Putin's court, and the Europeans, because the Europeans are also, they have their own national interests in all of this, like the Germans or the French or the British or the Polish. They all want to be part of the deal, so this ball keeps bouncing.
And we'll talk about those national interests in just a moment. I want to play you a clip now of NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, the guy who, of course, once called Donald Trump daddy. Here we go.
We are Russia's next target. And we are already in harm's way. The time for action is now.
The time for action is now. Strong words, but you spoke to Lithuanian Foreign Minister, the former Foreign Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis this week, who told you we're hearing nice words from NATO, but no action. Who's right?
I would side with Landsbergis. I think there's very little indication that NATO is taking particularly these sabotage operations that are linked to Russia on European soil very seriously. Or maybe they are taking it seriously, but they haven't got a specific, actionable playbook for this yet. We hear that they are getting there. And incidentally today in Germany, the Russian ambassador was called in by the German Foreign Ministry, where Germany, for the first time officially, accused Russia of standing behind some of these sabotage actions. So maybe Mr. Rutte is right, and maybe the ground is shifting there.
Because I mean, Mark Rutte has mentioned that Russia will feel the impacts. But do you think Vladimir Putin is sitting in the Kremlin and going, oh, I'm going to feel the impacts, and as a result does not,
You really want me to say
threats?
something I don't want to say, which is I don't think Putin gives a hoot about such statements.
In the climate of all of this, President Trump, he said this week, quote, I think they don't know what to do. Europe doesn't know what to do. Does he have a point?
Europe wants to maintain the old order based on the rule of law, on the UN Charter, on the rules-based order in general, in trade, in politics. And Trump is bringing this revolution to the world where the rules don't really matter. What matters is business, connections, friends. He keeps saying, I like this leader and therefore I will do business with him or her. And I don't like that leader, so I don't want... I mean, this is a revolution in terms of how international relations are handled. So he's saying, you should all be doing it my way. In that national strategy that you mentioned, he says explicitly, we encourage other nations to follow our example. So the question is Europe going to be able to maintain its model, which seems to be under pressure, not just from Russia, not just from China, not just from some Eurosceptic and rebellious parties internally, but also from the hitherto ally, the United States. So the question is the system that Europe built after the Second World War robust enough to withstand this and to actually keep going? It's an open question.
Well, that was going to be my next question, because is the model working? I mean, on the likes of Russia's frozen assets, it's just back and forth, back and forth. The EU model doesn't seem to function.
Yes, because it's a deliberative, consensus-driven model. But President Trump doesn't care about consensus. He cares about getting things done, getting deals, and doing favors. I mean, in many ways, what we see in the United States is a political economic model which you could call crony capitalism. This is something that we have seen in emerging markets, in some of the dictatorships in developing countries. And he's now saying, no, this is the model of the future. And Europe is saying, no, we want to stick to our old rules. The question is, can they do that?
And amid all America's posturing, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is taking this stance.
Hieran arbeiten wir.
Where we can work together with the United States in our own interests, beyond rhetoric, we will of course continue to do so. This applies in particular to the intensive work currently underway to achieve peace in Ukraine. But it also applies to the future of NATO. We will do this as a united and strong Europe. It's more important than ever to keep this Europe together, even under pressure, and not allow it to be divided by anyone or anything.
Of course, Friedrich Merz, an ardent transatlanticist, but he's certainly not taking the knee to Trump, right? I mean, is he telling Washington, we want you part of the picture, but we're backing our own too?
If Trump is right, and the world is going towards big powers deciding the fate of the world outside of the multilateral institutions, such as the UN or even the European Union, then in Europe you only realistically have three big powers: the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. So I think all three big countries in Europe, they're beginning to think, what if we need a plan B, which means we need to put things in place that if it comes to us, we manage to protect our interests, just as Mr. Trump wants us to. So I think everything Mr. Merz has done since winning the elections, he's preparing Germany for the worst-case scenario in which it will have to protect its interests. And we see, you know, this is going to the old pattern in Europe. It's always been the same powers. It was Russia, it was the United Kingdom, Britain, it was Germany, and it was France. France, you know, the Americans treat the French always very seriously for historical reasons, but they also think France is France. You know, it will always be an important European power. With Germany, you know, mixed feelings. Russia, as we know, as you yourself said, each American administration thinks it can sort of understand Russia and deal with Russia. So there is that understanding. But the sad part of all this is that as big powers go back into the mood of when they decide on everything, medium-sized countries such as Poland and small countries in Europe, they don't really have much say, unfortunately, in all this. And, you know, Poland's absence from some of these meetings and discussions is a testimony to that.
Well, I want to end, and we're running out of time, unfortunately, but I want to end with the term coined by Merz's predecessor, Olaf Scholz, as Zeitenwende, turning point. Are we at some of a turning point around peace negotiations with Ukraine, but also in terms of who are the major powers in Europe?
We're facing a revolution led from the United States, which built a certain political order after the Second World War and is now actively blowing that order apart. And what emerges from this, to me at least, is not entirely clear.
TVP World's News Director Adam Jasser, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And that's all for World News In Depth. Do stay with us here on TVP World for more. I'm Aaron Darman. Goodbye for now.